Ascent Podcast.
Hey everyone, Matthew here. Before we begin today's show, I just want to remind everyone of this month's sponsor, Whale Street. Whale Street is the DeFi engine that powers NFT economics on a massive scale. They make huge currency swaps happen, or whale swaps as they're called, with very small slippage costs and without crashing the system. They also engineered the largest ever NFT bundle and fractionalized it into the historic B20 tokens. Whale Street is all about upside, so dip into the liquidity pools for rich rewards. For B20, join discord.com/whale. That's discord.com/WHALE. And follow Whale Street on Twitter @WhaleStreetOFFL. Thank you and enjoy the show. Okay, Sam, welcome to the Matthew and Rizzle Show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Cool. So to get started, I'd love to have you introduce yourself to our audience, and then we can get into some of the amazing projects that you're involved in, like Verdigris and, of course, Async Art.
Sure. So I'm Sam Brukhman. I am the business development manager at Async Art, and I'm also the artistic director of the Verdigris Ensemble, which is a professional choral ensemble based in Dallas, Texas. It's been a wild ride over the last year with coronavirus and everything, but so happy to be a part of this. And I think both on the Async side and on the Verdigris Ensemble side, we are creating something that's going to be really, truly revolutionary.
Dude, Sam, I would love to hear like where you're at with the Verdigris project at this point. That's how you and I originally connected, and you had I forget exactly if I reached out to you or you reached out to me, but totally blew my mind with both the scope of this project and the concept. It was just and still is unlike anything I've ever heard up until this point. So do you mind like giving people an explanation? I don't even know how you start explaining this thing. I'm sure you've done it a few times now. So what's the deal, man? How do you explain this to people?
Rizzle, yeah, I reached out to you in November when I knew that this production was going to happen. We were really, really excited about it. And I think you posted something like looking to find like the best projects in the space, like reach out to me if you have ideas. And I was like, this is something that's like worthy of that. So, I reached out to you, and obviously our first conversation went really well. If I were to summarize what we're doing with Verdigris Ensemble in one sentence to audiences, is we're putting audiences in front of a shortwave radio in the 1930s and having them tune a turning knob on that radio to try and hear the supposed final distress calls of Amelia Earhart as she was taken off her path. And so, to summarize the work, what's interesting about it is that in 1937, a young teenager named Betty Clank was basically listening to her radio, doodling in her notebook, and all of a sudden she started to hear like these crazy sounds on the radio. Things like, "This is Amelia Earhart, this is Amelia Earhart, SOS, water's high." And as soon as she heard that, she was like, oh my God. She was very well aware of Amelia Earhart. I'm not sure that she knew that she was missing yet, but she definitely like recognized the voice immediately and started writing it down in a notebook. And this is what we have come to know as Betty's Notebook, and that's the name of the project. For more than 50 years, actually, she would take this notebook to a bunch of researchers, museums, scientists to try and prove the authenticity of the document. And Rick Gillespie, who's the founder of Tiger, which is a nonprofit that specifically specializes in aircraft recovery, really took ownership over the document and analyzed it and found that there definitely is circumstantial evidence that points to the fact that the document is true. There are things that are written in the notebook that people would not have known at the time. And so this adds to this flavor of mystery and intrigue around the event. And so, like, what we do with this piece, it's a 21-minute piece, is we allow our audiences to hear this simulation of what Betty Clank heard, and we allow them to actually edit the way that it's heard and customize the way that it's heard. And in that sense, it makes the piece, the piece is a very, it's very complicated. This is something that takes quite a bit of time to like dissect and, listen through, but to be able to give audiences the ownership of customizing the ultimate piece and allowing it to be heard in that way by other people, and customizing like timbre and texture and storyline, adds to this sort of like mysterious nature of the entirety of of the experience and the stimulation of what Betty Clank heard. So that's a basic overview of what Betty's Notebook is and the project is, and we are so excited to be the first mint on the AsyncMusic platform as it is released next month. And I'm happy to talk about that more. But needless to say, I think that what Async Art is doing is really something special. And it's changing the way that we creatively think about, interpret, create, and so on, music and so on and so forth. So very, very exciting stuff.
Wait, so Sam, there's a music portion ensemble that you didn't quite touch on in terms of how that relates to the story. So how does that piece fit into it? And I guess to like a larger extent, like what is it about like remixing this and putting it in, sort of like tweaking the ways that you hear this thing? Like, what is it about doing that with this piece?
Yeah,
that makes
absolutely.
It
So let's break this down a little
interesting,
bit.
if that makes sense.
So the piece of music is a 21-minute piece. It is sung by four. There are four major components. One component is the choir. The second component is Betty Clank's voice. There are several parts of several interviews that were taken of her describing her experience, talking on the radio, and so on and so forth. There are, and then there are also interferences on the radio. So jazz standards that are also sung by the choir. That sort of weave in and out throughout the piece that sort of obscure what Amelia Earhart is saying. And also, another part, which is very interestingly, it is an analysis of Betty's voice. So the composer actually took Betty's voice, took it through like an editing software and isolated certain notes and pitches and then put it back into the piece. And symbolically, it's as if Betty Clank is singing with the choir, but also she's speaking at the same time. And this is it's really interesting because it sounds like the gentle whirring of a plane or a propeller, even in that sense. So those are the four main layers of what the piece is comprised of. The music itself is very interesting in that it is a continuous wash of sound that is basically narrated by Betty Clank. And so we've had several listening parties, both with our choir, with our board of directors, with several other people, influencers and stuff, and we've gotten feedback that like this piece of music is almost like a musical podcast of sorts, or some sort of like oratorio, if you want to get fancy in terms of classical music language. So that's basically the breakdown of the piece. And the way that we make it customizable and the way where the async art part comes into play is that these four parts can be customized by their owners. So we're selling 5 NFTs, 1 master track, and then 4 stem NFTs. And the stems actually, when you put all 4 stems together, they comprise the entirety of the piece. Within each stem, there are 3 audio visual tracks. And so what does that mean? That means that like the audience gets a menu of options that they can choose from to hear their favorite iteration of the music. So let's break this down really quickly. So the choir, which sings what's written in the notebook, the person who owns the choir layer gets to choose how the choir sounds. So are they do they sound like they're singing in a small room, in a studio? Do they sound like they're singing in a concert hall? Or is it somewhat of a binaural sound, meaning like do you hear certain things in your left ear and others in your right? And so in that way, it adds like sort of a little bit of drama to the piece. Betty's voice, actually, the owner of Betty's voice gets to change the trajectory of the story. So there are parts of Betty's story. You know, obviously these interviews span hours, and you can't possibly include everything. However, there are really interesting parts to the story. You know, things like her talking about, you know, her experience, or maybe it's talking about a specific instance, hearing Fred Noonan, who's Amelia Earhart's navigator, sort of what he was saying in that moment, or even like talking about being disbelieved for the next 50 years. So as the owner of Betty's voice, you actually get to control the trajectory of the story and sort of change it accordingly. Betty's choir is what we talked about, which is like a spectral analysis of the voice and isolating certain pitches and notes, and it sounds like the gentle whirring of a plane. The controller of that gets to determine what the overall piece sounds like. So does it sound really distressing? Does it sound really clear or ethereal? And so the owner really gets to set the overall tone of how the piece sounds and how it is interpreted by everyone else. And I think that's actually one of the most important parts of this entire piece. And then finally, the jazz standards. So we call this layer Betty's radio. The owner of Betty's radio gets to choose which jazz pieces intertwine and come in and out as through white noise periodically throughout the piece. So as a controller of that, you basically get to choose your favorite jazz tunes and sort of plug it in. And you know, there's very specific symbology there that actually like where the jazz pieces, the lyrics of the jazz pieces actually play into the story and add to the story in that way as well. So, you know, it's a really like, there's no easy way to describe this piece. It's like one of those things where it's like, you have to experience it and then you have to like do research on it. And I've had several people, you know, approach me and be like, man, this is like so cool and so different. Like I went home and I went and researched Amelia Earhart. I didn't even know that she had a navigator, Fred Noonan, with her. And so like, that's exactly the point of what we're trying to do. Like there's so much in there that you just have to experience it. You just have to listen to it and you have to like figure it out. Now there's one final aspect here that I didn't mention, because we're talking solely about audio, but there is a visual component. And we're actually really thankful to be working with Brian Brinkman as the artist for this. Brian is like the man of the hour lately because he was just featured on SNL, or his artwork was featured on SNL, which is like amazing, during their NFT skit. I don't know if you guys saw that. And he has created, for every variant, he has created a unique image to match that variant. So if you take a look at, there's a blog post coming out soon on Async Art, and there's also like a lot of information on the project at verdigrismusic.org. If you go to the website, or either ways, and we'll be posting about it on social media as well, but if you go to these platforms, you'll be able to see sort of the different iterations of the artwork that is generated based on the different choices that the layer owners and the stem owners make throughout the piece. So really, really interesting.
So first of all, hashtag blessed. We've been throwing around a lot of hashtags. I never in my wildest imagination would have imagined that our conversation would go down this route. I mean, I had no idea what you were planning with Verdigris. This is wow. Let me process this.
I had that conversation with him like originally, and I was like,
yeah,
holy shit.
I know, it's
dude.
not
Like,
it's not one of those things where it's
whoa.
like you can explain it in 2 sentences. You like really have to like invest in it. Like the piece is so interesting in that like it just takes time to be able to like really, really dig into it. And there's so much to dig into, like so many little pieces within the piece that are just like nuggets of gold that are just discoverable and rediscoverable. So yeah, thankful. Thank you guys for having me on the podcast for sure. Really wonderful to be here.
So when it comes to the collectors in the NFT space, I think a lot of people are starting to, at least in my opinion, the collectors who are really taking what they're doing seriously. They're looking for stories to collect, right? And there are layers upon layers upon layers of stories within what you're putting together with Verdigris and Async. I think we can probably talk about this at some later date. I just want to say what an incredible story, number one.
Thank you.
But where I'd sort of like the conversation to go, and I want to keep it on the music, the avenue of music and what you're doing at Async. But I'm wondering if you could kind of set the stage for where the rest of the space is when it comes to music, NFTs, and everything in between before we get into the new Async Music platform that you guys are building out.
Sure. It's interesting. So my background, obviously, based on what I've just told you, my background is in music. I studied classical music at a really small specialized school, but one of the best in the country, called Westminster Choir College. And entering into the space, I've always really wanted to enter into the space. I knew, I was an early adopter of Bitcoin in 2015. I bought Ethereum when it was just released, and I've always looked for an entry point. And then when NFTs started to like sort of rumble a little bit, it just so happened like that was sort of concurrent with coronavirus. And as a result, like, as a musician, I lost all of my gigs. I lost, all engagements. Like I was supposed to be like conducting around the country and, sort of leading ensembles and doing all that stuff. And so when that all sort of fell through, I needed to find something else that would be able to allow me to continue, doing what I loved. And so, I started doing research on platforms like Async and a bunch of different areas. And what we hopped on, or what I realized was that like there's a lot of potential for music in the NFT space. And in August, when I was sort of like looking at all this in September, beginning of September, there was just a slow like talk about NFTs. Some people had released some, just uploading music onto the blockchain, and then others were starting to play with it. And as we've come from August to now, what I think is going to happen is I think that there's going to be a really significant expansion and almost like explosion of crypto music, if you will, within the next couple of months. And the reason I say this is because I think people are slowly beginning to realize that I think musicians are beginning to realize what visual artists saw first. And I also it's a little bit more complicated with musicians as well, because you have agencies and you have record labels. But I think that what's about to happen is like a lot of musicians are now waking up and they're beginning to see the possibilities. And also what we're beginning to see is that a lot of platforms see the possibilities. And we have things, I think it was Super Rare that, announced a couple of weeks ago, like we might be doing an experimental music thing. Async is launching programmable music. Nifty has done a bunch of music drops and has experimented with different iterations of music with Rack and with Bloud and a bunch of other people. And I think what is about to happen is we just need a few more use cases to be successful. And we need a few more instances to be successful, like Betty's Notebook, and we're going to see a huge influx of musicians come into the space. For Verdigris, we are, from the Verdigris Ensemble perspective, we right now, we were just featured on NPR. We were, featured in several different publications, national and local. And we've had a lot of people reach out to us, orchestras, string quartets, other choirs, and be like, how do we get into NFTs? We want to be be the first orchestra to make an NFT. We want to be the first string quartet to make an NFT. And everybody's really paying attention to like what's going to happen with Betty's Notebook. And if Betty's Notebook is successful, I think we're going to see a huge influx, like truly a huge influx into the space. So I think like music is an undiscovered gold mine. It's still very, very early. And we have a lot of platforms that are beginning to utilize different music platforms and accessibility. And I think that especially async music, I really believe in customizable music and the idea of making more democratic. And I think that is going to be a really, really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see how this all unfolds in the next couple of months. I think we're gonna see a huge like uptick and explosion in the space in terms of musicians coming on. We already kind of see that.
Totally. And like you said, there's a lot of early experiments being run across some of the different platforms. But I'm really curious if you could unpack what async music is going to be doing when it comes to programmable music. Because
yes.
The experiments now, like I said, they're very early, sort of like dipping toes in the water, essentially. But it feels like what async is coming with is something a little bit more substantial, a little bit meatier, a little bit more async.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Glenn Gould was a world famous pianist, and in 1969, you can actually look at the YouTube video if you Google it, where he talks about, and I actually posted this on my Twitter as well a couple of weeks ago. He predicted what async art is doing. He said something along the lines of like, I see that recorded music is the future. I see recorded music becoming a lot more democratic, where we actually distribute kits to our audiences and have them customize their favorite iterations of the music that we play. And that in and of itself is like a fulfillment of a prophecy that is like swiftly happening at async music right now. So here's the basic premise of async music. If you know async art is all about creating dynamic visual art through two major ways. One is fractionalization. So you take parts of a painting, you isolate it into layers or like individual parts, and you allow people to buy those individual parts and then customize them to be reflected on the masterpiece. Well, if you can think of that on a visual side, then you can also imagine that on the music side, because that's exactly how it works. So there's a masterpiece, there's a master MP3 file that is like anyone can hear it and everyone can listen to it. And then there are stems that comprise the music. So for example, like let's take something really classic like voice, piano, percussion. 3 instruments, 3 different stems. And what async music is now doing is allowing people to create, or composers and musicians to create different ways of hearing that music. So for example, maybe the sound layer, maybe the voice layer has different lyrics, and people get to choose which lyrics are their favorite. Maybe there's maybe the percussion instrument plays different rhythms at different times. Maybe the guitar plays different harmonies. And so for the first time, what people are able to do, the purchasers of these different stems, they're able to customize what everything sounds like. And the most interesting part about this is that it's very, very cool. Like let's say, Rizzle, you own the voice layer, and there are like 3 different variants within that stem. And you're like, people have heard, variant 1 and 2, but people haven't heard variant 3. And let's say this song plays on the radio, and you're like, oh my God, this song is about to be played on, like, let's say NPR for the first time nationally, and everybody's going to be able to hear it. And you're like, just for this one event, what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger variant 3 that no one has ever heard before, and allow everyone in the world to hear this new version of the song that has previously been completely undiscovered and silent. And just for that moment, just for the time that it plays on the radio, That's it. So what you do is you trigger that stem and or that variant rather, and that automatically gets reflected on the radio. It gets reflected on streaming platforms. It gets reflected on other things. This is what async is working towards, and this is why I think that async music is really, really something that is also undiscovered, but very interesting, because, like I said, for the first time, it allows its owners to dictate the way that it sounds based on the composer's intent and the musician's intent. And it does so in such a way that sort of gamifies music listening. So people actually have to come back and listen to the track over time, and it creates a little bit more of a bridge, a little bit more investment in the piece, rather than, like what we see on Spotify, which is many times, and I'm a victim of, or I'm an offender of this, which is like mindless listening. And sometimes we all need that, but to be able to actually invest in a piece and really listen to it and listen to the nuances and listen to the differences, that is something that in a nutshell is what async is doing. And that is something that I think is going to be really, really revolutionary and really different.
Dude, I agree with you 1,000% that this is like an untapped gold mine of the music industry. And we're really just scratching the surface in terms of experimentation. I got to imagine that your project is probably as complicated and involved, not in a bad way, in an amazing way, which is why, when we originally had this conversation, I'm like, this is a museum piece. It's got to be, right? This the undertaking and effort that's gone into it just lends itself in that direction, especially with it being a landmark concept in the first place. But on the flip side, man, I'm just interested. I have a lot of respect for your extensive musical background, and obviously that's played a large role in what you've created here. Are there any genres or types of music that lend itself better to this async model than others? You know what I mean? Are there certain types or certain even instruments or voices that there are people out there that are this is a slam dunk. This whole, style of music needs to get involved right now because it's so easy to chop it up and, mix it around? Or is everybody sort of on a level playing field in terms of getting started? Or, how do you see that?
We've seen a lot of different genres come onto the platform, where we're seeing them right now in progress. And I don't think that there's necessarily a better genre to do this, because at the end of the day, it's all about making layers, and it's all about how your music is composed. And as we know, every music nowadays, every genre of music nowadays, whether that be hip hop or EDM or even classical music, is all at the end of the day layered. And it's all based on stems, and it's all based on different samples and so on and so forth. And so from my perspective, it's actually really cool to see, when Async announces the rest of the lineup that's happening over the next couple of weeks, you're going to see all sorts of different genres come up. And I think that's the really exciting part about this. It's the fact that you have these genres of EDM paired with classical, paired with hip hop, paired with country, paired with rock, paired with all these different things, and that is the really, really interesting part about it. I think it's a level playing field for sure. And I think that in every case, every single ensemble and every single artist that we've seen use it so far has used it in really interesting and different ways. Whether that's actually altering certain endings or certain pathways of the music that you hear, or, just adding certain qualities, textural or timbre qualities to the music that make it sound, slightly different and add a little bit more depth and complexity. So I think from our perspective, what I've seen so far, and again, we're all learning through this. The Async team is learning through it. I'm learning through it. The composer that we commissioned for Betty's Notebook, Nicholas Reeves, he took a lot of time to learn it. It's all really experimenting right now. But what we're seeing, some of the musical parts that we're seeing are genius. It's just like I would have never guessed that it would happen the way that it does, and it's really quite innovative and really different. So just to answer your question, I think it is a level playing field for sure.
So I think this is a cool opportunity to kind of start diving deeper into the metaverse, because you've been doing a lot of gallery tours, exhibitions in blockchain-powered VR worlds. And I'm wondering, how does NFT music intersect with that? Like, where is the natural home for NFT music? And in particular, something as complex and rich as the music that will be released on Async Music platform?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we'll, the short answer to this is like we're gonna have to see where it goes a little bit, but I do think that these things are almost like destined to be sound installations of sorts, where you will be able to see live the changes that happen both on the visual album cover art side and the actual music. So, in the case of Betty's Notebook, like I can see that being anywhere. Like I can see that being, Somnium Space, Crypto Voxels. I can see that being in traditional museums. I can see that, I can see it everywhere. And I can actually also see like some of these pieces becoming more interactive, in terms of utilizing VR and AR and in gallery spaces in the future. But I think generally speaking, we're going to have to like really see where this goes. I think like, on a fundamental level, the goal of Async is to be able to get these tracks to be streamable everywhere, on traditional and non-traditional platforms. And I think like with all of that, there are layers here, things like the changeable and the ever-evolving album cover artworks that change along with the audio. Those are artworks in and of themselves. And, Brian Brinkman, in our case, Brian Brinkman has done an amazing job creating like a really compelling visual that's based off of some of the things that were found in Betty's Notebook. And so I think like what this music does in essence is it gives sort of like a multifaceted approach. Like these pieces are both music pieces, but they're also like audio visual pieces. And in that way, they all of a sudden become almost like sound installations or art sound installations. And I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot of that. And that's going to be a really, really compelling reason to start putting them into galleries and museums and all sorts of stuff. Especially as we get more into the space and we see a lot more experimentation.
Dude, in terms of like how this works at like a very ground level, right? If I'm like a musician and I'm listening to this and I'm like, holy shit, Sam just blew my mind. I want to get in on this async, music platform as soon as it comes out. On like a very like basic level, I would assume that if you're making a music NFT with like multiple layers and, that are composable and all this stuff, that there's a higher minting cost depending on the amount of layers. I would, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would assume that making it a music NFT versus like a static NFT of like, or a image or something like that doesn't necessarily affect the cost. But, if I'm interested in getting involved in something like this and I'm a musician, I assume in terms of like time dedicated to it, the sky is probably the limit in terms of how much you want to play with your project and how much you want to add to it and everything. But like, is there like a, fixed cost per layer, or, if I want to add like 100 layers, am I looking at like a significantly like higher entry point than, 5 layers, or how does it play out on like a ground floor level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, like, I don't know the exact answer to it. I'll let you know once I mint Betty's Notebook. But I think what we've seen with async artwork is that it varies. It really varies. I've had artists come to me that have said like, I have 60 different layers, and like it's going to cost me a total of like $1,000 to mint the whole thing. And but we've also had downtimes where it's been really cheap to sort of like upload these layers and so on and so forth. So I think it depends on timing. I also think it depends on how many layers and how many things we're minting. Async has made several steps to sort of mitigate these costs. So like, for example, we have something called unmintable or unminted layers with visual art, where it's like the artist can mint part of the piece and then continue minting as people buy things to sort of like mitigate and lower that cost. But also, I think it comes down to like basically timing and business on the blockchain, on the Ethereum network specifically. Right. I do think that in the future there will be more effective and efficient ways to mint artworks, and I look forward to the time to when we don't have to like stay up until 2:00 in the morning to like mint something at a lower cost. Unfortunately, that's kind of the reality of the Ethereum blockchain. But there are constantly, as you guys are well aware, there are lots of different blockchains that are sort of being developed right now that are really interesting and different. And I hope that platforms, like all platforms really, like Super Rare, Nifty Gateway, like all these, so all of these platforms consider going to more efficient blockchains, or at least experimenting with some of that as we develop it.
Cool. And sort of like I was touching on a little bit earlier, mentioning how you've been putting on a lot of tours, gallery tours, exhibitions within the metaverse. Rizzle and I, obviously, as co-founders of the Whip, and like thinking deeply about these metaverse events, it's always cool to meet someone else, a fellow metanaut, if you will, who goes between worlds and kind of kicks the tires on how events are run and takes the time and effort to put them together. So I'm curious if you kind of go through your experiences hosting these gallery tours and bringing folks into these like very primitive worlds right now to kind of take in and experience the art that's been created here in the galleries and the builds and the architecture and stuff like that. The good, the bad, the nitty gritty. Curious to hear your takes.
Yeah, I think what when I first discovered CryptoVoxels, I was sort of like, I don't know. I have to admit I was not like very impressed. But as I got, no, and that's not a knock on CryptoVoxels.
No,
really.
I had the same reaction, dude.
Yeah, I mean, like as I got to know CryptoVoxels and as I got to like explore through CryptoVoxels, I started to see like why it's so interesting and important. It's really not that different from, I when I was younger, I'd play video games, and in those video games, I'd love to do co-op, with friends or whatever, and CryptoVoxels really isn't that different from that. I think that what CryptoVoxels does is serve a really vital way of, I don't know, it's like almost like a psychological thing. Like, you can't always fly from across the world in order to be with a group of people, but it takes almost nothing. It only requires a computer and no flying in order to be together with your friends in a metaverse. And I think in that sense, like, it's actually like a really, really interesting tool, especially as we develop it further. With VR and AR and all that stuff, I think it's going to be like a really cool way to connect with people and to talk with people and to get to know people through a medium that doesn't require you to like fly across the world or fly to a different area to be a part of it. So, from my perspective, when I've done these gallery tours with Async, some of the things that I've loved is being able to, like, I physically feel like people are with me during these gallery tours. Like I see them around, and I see them moving around, and I see them clapping, see them emoting and doing all that stuff. And that's like a really cool feeling, and especially like during coronavirus when like everybody is shut in anyway, like this is a really cool, like it psychologically brings you into a place that makes you feel like you're in a community, you're in a group of people, and you're not alone. it's a really, really cool feeling. And I think one of the positive things that have come out of Crypto Voxels has been like, it's cool that we can literally put up our async artworks in a gallery space, and then I can, go through them, and then, people can literally click on the artwork, go to the Async Art website, and, put a bid or buy it now, or buy an artwork immediately. And actually, I've seen that several times throughout our process where I've mentioned something, and then like 5 minutes later, someone bids on it or buys it. So I think I love that. I love that capability. I love that accessibility. Also, as it pertains to music, and as we continue to do this, we saw Travis Scott on Fortnite, a couple of months ago, do a drop or like a performance on Fortnite where you could like run around and do that. And I honestly think that's the future. We're going to see a lot more performers than doing like live concerts. They're going to be doing concerts in the metaverse. They'll be doing concerts on Somnium Space, on Crypto Voxels, and everything in between. And that is like a really exciting prospect to me. And I'll tell you why. Because, many musicians rely off of traveling and touring and making money that way. Yep. And it's quite exhausting, to be honest. Like, to be able to go through, like to go across the United States or to go across Europe and be on a bus all the time or whatever. It's a costly thing, and it's a really it's a hard thing to do. And you can only reach a certain amount of people doing that. Now, for some artists, that's a really accessible thing. They have a really great following. They can go anywhere they want and they'll have a following. But for most musicians, it's quite exhausting and sometimes not worth it financially. And so doing concerts in the metaverse actually presents a unique solve to that problem. It allows musicians and allows artists to like be together with a bunch of people and feel as physically present as you possibly can to a musician or to a famous artist or whatever. And so I think that my ultimate take on metaverse and galleries and all this different stuff, I think it's honestly like the future. And I think we're going to be using it more and more. And I think that as these platforms grow and expand and become more accessible to more people, Crypto Voxels, that's one thing that Crypto Voxels does quite well, is you don't have to download anything. You literally go to a website and, it's right there. So I think that this is going to be a really important tool, and I see a lot of musicians entering it, and a lot of artists. They've already entered it, but I think it's going to be augmented as we go forward, and it's a really exciting time for the metaverse, for like different worlds and all that stuff. So I'm looking forward to seeing that growth and development.
I agree, man. We've done a lot with different musical acts and everything, and I feel like it'll be really interesting once there are some ways to, potentially incorporate what you're doing in a more extensive way into Crypto Voxels or the metaverse, because it would be so cool. One of the things, we pile a lot of people in for these events, but, with some of these musical events, obviously the musician can't literally perform in the virtual world. You're watching their avatar or watching a video of them performing or hanging out with them live while the video of them or the music is performing. But it would be so cool to have some of these layers in these virtual worlds that people can, physically interact with live and, sort of adjust these things. I mean, you can see how this becomes, a musical experience, like you were saying, sort of consciously listening to, this music and adjusting it and tweaking it, and that kind of thing. It's just so exciting for, how this is all going to shake out in the long run. Sam, what do you collect on the side, man? Outside of async and, your music endeavor, do you have any geeky hobbies or interesting NFT projects that you're just low key accumulating or collecting or anything like that? Or do you mostly stay on this stuff?
Yeah, I think to be honest with you, there are so many drops now that I literally can't keep track of everything.
Right.
I love NBA Top Shot. I mean, it's like a staple for me. Nifty Gateway has done some like really interesting things lately, especially. And I really like one of the interesting things that I am sort of talking with like a few friends is like discovering the unknown and up and coming artists on Rarible. It's always like really fun to like, just like kind of like dig around and see what's possible and what's out there. And it's really, really cool to see sort of these artists expand and grow and to be a part of their first drop. So for me, it's actually been a lot of collecting unknown people and sort of like up and coming people that are friends of friends or maybe just entering into the space that I accidentally stumble upon. So I'm all about supporting like young and up and coming talent because I know how it feels as one. And I've been in the place, and I still currently am really with Verdigris Ensemble, where we have to fight for every news opportunity, for every media opportunity, for every project, essentially. And like I want people, like especially honest and good talent, to feel like they are being supported on the blockchain, because I know that for me, when I have felt that, it's been like just amazing and really rewarding, and it felt like really confidence boosting. But it doesn't happen nearly enough, and so like the more I can extend that to other people, and the more that I can like make people affirm their artistic quality and their artistic vision, like I'm all about that. I love collecting the Odessas, the Beeples, and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like they're going to be successful no matter what. For me, it's really important to also like foster growth and support for the young people that don't already have like major followings as well. So that's basically been my focus lately.
Give us some names, man. Some of the unknown, unnamed artists that you're collecting.
Okay, I knew you'd ask this question. Let me go on Rarible.com.
He doesn't know, man. They're so unknown. They're like they're underground. Dude, I do the same thing, man. I'm like, ooh, no one looks like they discovered this person, and this thing looks awesome. Hopefully, it's not pirated, and I'm gonna scoop it up.
Yes. Okay, hold on. Let me give me 1 second. So, here are a few people that I really like. There's a guy named Gabriel Aronson. He is a renderer. I think he's done a lot of rendering and sort of design. He's on Rarible. So if you look at Gabriel Aronson, I've collected some of his stuff. I think it's like really well done. Another one that's like been really successful, especially on, I think, Maker's Place, but also he did his first drop on Rarible, is Waxbones. His artwork is very reminiscent of very cartoony, something that I would expect on a tattoo on someone's like shoulder or something. There's something really cool about it, really unique and different. Some other people, I really like an artist named I Am Optimistic on Rarible. He did this drop, and he's the most I've collected so far. He did this thing called Priority Slaps, where he actually he did artwork on a Priority Mail sticker. And those are called slaps because what you do after these artworks is like you take them off the sticker and then you slap them on like a surface or like a mailbox or something. And what he did was he actually scanned every image, and the images are really, really compelling, really different. Something that I haven't seen in the space before. So those are three. Let me give you two more. I'm a huge fan of more Polaroids. I think what he's done on the Async platform is nothing short of miraculous in terms of like gaining a following very quickly. But he's starting to release stuff on Rarible, which are just like Polaroid renders that I find to be really compelling of some of the Polaroids that he's done. And then finally, one of my friends that is still very unknown, but I really, really think his artwork stands out, is Mark Zlotsky. So Mark Zlotsky has several pieces both on Async and on Rarible that are very like playful, cartoonish, some people have said that they feel like he's like a Dr. Seuss of like artists on the blockchain, and I don't think that we really see a whole lot of Dr. Seuss's here, and I think like his style is very interesting and very unique for the space. So those are the ones that I've mainly been paying attention to recently. I think I think they're all really talented in their own way.
That's awesome. I can't wait for folks to listen to this and find some new artists to go check out. I feel like every collector is trying to find that next artist to collect. Yeah. And when you have recommendations from someone like yourself, it's super, super helpful, both to the artists and then the collectors. But as we wrap up, I want to make sure that we hit all the points that people need to kind of remember. And then, of course, have you share where folks can follow you at. So let people know about some key dates they need to bear in mind if you have any, and then let people know where they should follow you at.
Great. So folks, make sure to pay attention to the Async Art social media, because we're going to be releasing a lot over the next couple of weeks regarding artists, our first wave lineup, and really like how starting to break down what the technology really looks like. We are hoping to launch by the end of next month, tentatively, AsyncMusic specifically. So just make sure to point it out, or just look out for that. And then there are going to be several different media publications, both national and local, coming out about Betty's Notebook specifically. We already, like I said before, we already have an article in NPR on All Things Considered, which you can check out. But there will be more, and I'll make sure to post that on my Twitter and also on the Verdigris website. On that note, on the Async side, make sure to if you're not following Async already, make sure to follow them, Async Art, on Twitter, Instagram, and let us know like what you're up to. I'd love to talk with anyone that has felt a lot of inspiration listening to this. I hope that we can sort of provide support and help in that way. So, if you're listening to this podcast and you feel really inspired, feel free to directly reach out to me via DMs. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about like whether that's the Async Music side or the Async Art side. And then finally, check out Verdigris Ensemble. We're a Dallas-based ensemble, but really we're on the cusp of being something much more, and we're very excited about all of the upcoming projects that we have. Our mission and vision is to be able to reach a wider spread of audiences through creative concert programming, unconventional use of space, and collaboration. And we want to be able to show people how powerful vocal music can be, and I hope that people will see that through Betty's Notebook. We have a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, Verdigris Ensemble, Verdigris Ensemble, or if you want to visit our website, it's verdigrismusic.org. And finally, myself, at Sam Brukhman, very simple, on all platforms as well. So thank you all, and really, really enjoyable time here. Love talking with you both, and any way that I can help personally, or Async can help in sort of getting more artists into blockchain and into crypto, and especially musicians, because that's my bread and butter. I will do anything and everything that I can to help in it, in any way. So please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking your time to speak with us today, Sam, enlightening us about all the amazing things that you're cooking up with Verdigris, and of course over at Async, and wish you nothing but the best and keep on creating, brother.
Thank you, guys. Really great to be on here.
Thanks, Sam. Always a pleasure, man.
Hey, everyone. Matthew here. Thank you for listening to today's show. I just want to remind everyone of this month's sponsor, Whale Street. Whale Street is the DeFi engine that powers NFT economics on a massive scale. They make huge currency swaps happen, or whale swaps as they're called, with very small slippage costs and without crashing the system. They also engineered the largest ever NFT bundle and fractionalized it into the historic B20 tokens. Whale Street is all about upside, so dip into the liquidity pools for rich rewards. For B20, join discord.com/whale. That's discord.com/WHALE. And follow Whale Street on Twitter @Whale Street OFFL. Thank you, and see you next episode.